Hey everybody, my name is SPAZ and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be discussing an Australian band by the name of Icehouse. Now, Icehouse is run by a gentleman by the name of Iva Davies, but I could be wrong because Ray Davies, as we call him in America, is actually Ray Davis. Us Americans take D-A-V-I-E-S as Davies. Well, guess what? Ray Davies is actually pronounced Ray Davis. And so maybe Iva Davies is pronounced Iva Davis. I don't know. So guess what? To avoid embarrassment, I'm just going to call him Iva. So with every CD Junkie video, I like to tell you how I got into the band. Well, one day, this is 1980, probably late 1980. I was 16, 17 years old, depending on when it first came out. But I was with some friends. I was the fifth wheel. A double date plus the fifth wheel. We pulled in the parking lot, and I think we were going to go to Fuddruckers and then Music Market or something. Fuddruckers is a hamburger joint. I'm not cursing. So we turned, they were playing the radio, and a song came on that I'd never heard called We Can Get Together. So I'm sitting there mesmerized going, who is this? What is this? They're all ready to get out and eat. And I'm sitting there, no, can we just stay in the car till they back announce who this is? So luckily, that was the last song of the set. So they announced We Can Get Together as by a band called Icehouse. So I just knew right then, when we went into Music Market, that's the album I was going to buy. And of course, it was there. So I bought the first Icehouse album, which is this. This is the American Icehouse album. And I'll get into that in just a few minutes. So anyway, let's go into Icehouse's catalog, and I'll tell you a little bit about each release. Let's start with the debut album. This is the Australian version. When the band was first formed, they were actually known under the band name Flowers, and the debut album was called Icehouse, because that's the song on the album. So the first Flowers album, at this point, Flowers, the band, was Iva, and it was a four-piece band, and obviously influenced by Bowie, Roxy Music, Velvet Underground. So they had an edgier sound, which was maybe guitar and keyboards almost at the same level, but maybe a little bit more guitar. So Flowers, fantastic album, has We Can Get Together. This is the deluxe version that has a bonus live disc and a DVD with videos and TV performances, and it does have bonus tracks as well. But that's the first Icehouse album, came out in 1980. Well, what they did for America, they remixed the album, brought the keyboards up, took one song off, and released this. This is the same album, but it's just, as I said, remixed and minus one track. That is the album by Icehouse. That also came out in 1980. I'd say that this is definitely rougher and edgier. Maybe not by much, but definitely not as smooth and silky and wonderfully synth poppy as this. Now, when I say synth pop, it's not just strictly keyboards. Like I said, there's guitar, bass, drums, and it's a fantastic blending of great songs and great musicianship. So by the time the second album, Primitive Man, came out in 1982, Icehouse was down to just Iva and some studio musicians plus producer Keith Forsey. This is the expanded edition, which has all this extra wonderful stuff on it. And this was a lot more experimental, definitely a lot more keyboards, great songs. Great Southern Land was a huge hit in Australia for them. In fact, it might even be the Australian anthem by now. If it isn't, it should be. Uniform is on this. Hey Little Girl was a huge hit off of this album. Worldwide, in fact, it was really, really huge in England and all that. So that is an album that came out in 1982. 1984, they followed up. Iva had a full band with him this time. With this band, it's more of a rock album as opposed to a synth pop album like Primitive Man was. Taking the Town is off this album. Dusty Pages, Don't Believe Anymore. Lots of great songs. Someone Like You. And there's the bonus material there. The following year, Iva was commissioned to write music for the Sydney Dance Company. And it came out credited to the Sydney Dance Company. And it's called Boxes. And this actually It's mostly instrumental, but there are some tracks here that eventually ended up in full form on the next album, Measure for Measure. Now, this is a different cover than the U.S. I actually prefer the U.S. version, I think, but then I've gotten used to this. This is, again, an expanded edition with bonus tracks. This was a very commercial album. No Promises was just a fantastic song. Got a lot of airplay here on KROQ. Just some absolutely stellar songs on this album. Very moody at times, rocking at times, like the song Mr. Big. But this is a fantastic album. Great thing about Icehouse is the fact that like every album was different from each other. No two albums sound the same. Iva was always progressing, taking the music the next step forward or maybe sideways, but always challenging himself and his bandmates. Now, I want to bring one thing up, and I just want to get it out of the way. The mullet. Okay? I'm sorry. Bless you, Iva, but that mullet in the 80s was... So in 1987... out comes Man of Colors. This was yet another step forward. It was much more commercial. In fact, John Oates is on one of the tracks. Very, very, very much and of course, this is the expanded edition. Look at all that stuff there. Crazy is just one of Iva's best songs. Electric Blue was a hit. And the title track, Man of Colors, got a lot of airplay on FM, on like maybe like the smooth jazz stations and stuff like that. It wasn't smooth jazz, but it was a relaxing, wonderful song. But this was 1987, Man of Colors. It was probably their commercial high point in the U.S. And oddly enough, this being their commercial high point, they didn't have any more albums released in the U.S., but I've sure got a few more to go through here, and I will do that. Code Blue was the next album, came out in 1990. I have to admit, when this album came out, I was disappointed because I was looking at it in terms of which direction do I want an artist to go. But as a music fan and also a music journalist, critic, you have to accept what the artist wants to do. Fandom is too heavy on what I want the artist to do and not I'm going to accept what the artist wants to do. And once you get past that hurdle, then this is a stellar album. It's very AOR. It's very commercial rock. Iva and Icehouse could have toured with Foreigner just as much as they could have toured with INXS or something if they had come to America. But that came out in 1990. Then in 1993, out comes the album Big Wheel. This continued in the commercial rock direction, but it also added a lot of keyboards back into the mix. So it's a nice blend of modern Icehouse and the older Icehouse, but it's still at this point, 1993, a very modern sounding album. 2 years later, out comes the Berlin Tapes. Berlin Tapes was a collection of cover versions, and it's got there's like Loving the Alien and Heaven and, a lot of his influences, and he covers music by some of his 80s contemporaries as well. And this has bonus tracks. I believe there's actually a newer version than this that goes along in this series, but I haven't managed to pick that up yet. And guess what? That's it with Icehouse studio albums. 1995. And as far as I know, he's been working on stuff, but nothing has ever come out. But I do have two more titles to show you. There was a lot of Icehouse collections around, but I'm going to show you the two best in my opinion. Now, the first compilation I'm going to show you is one of my favorites. It's called White Heat, 30 Hits. And this one is autographed by Iva. I think that when you go to your local record shop, or if you order online, you may not find one with Iva's autograph, but, I ordered it, pre-order type stuff. Anyway, this has 2 CDs featuring 30 great tracks, singles, and it has a DVD featuring tons of videos. So 30 hits. It's called White Heat. Now, there's a possibility that this is still available without the DVD, so I still highly recommend that if you want to get it, because it really has the high points. With me, a band, you always need to have the whole catalog in order to really appreciate them. The deep album cuts and stuff. And trust me, Icehouse has a lot of great deep album cuts. And the other compilation I want to show you, this is called 12-Inch Versions and Remixes Volume 1. And this has a lot of the classic tracks, remixes, and such. One of my favorite remixes of all time is this version of No Promises on Disc 2. And I think that there was actually a second volume of this, but it was like more modern remixes of classic Icehouse tracks. But anyway, that's it with my stack o Icehouse. If you are into great Australian rock and new wave, electronic rock, synth pop, whatever. If you're into Roxy music, Bowie, artists with those kinds of influences, you're definitely going to dig Icehouse. So I would recommend you to check them out. Do that right now. I thank you for hanging out with me on this episode. And until the next time, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie.